Do you know your name? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Beauty.
Yeah. And do you know what year this is? And she doesn't know that I'm her daughter. She doesn't know my name. She really doesn't know my relationship to her.
It's a new job every day because things change all the time.
It robs the person who has the disease of their personality. It drains the family.
It's certainly changed the relationship she and I have. She started to become very scattered in her thinking and forget like the birthdays of the grandchildren, and I would have to tell her those over and over again about 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago. But it was very gradual with her, so she would forget, but then it'd be like, well, I'll just remind her again, it's not a big deal. These were seen as senility, just attributes of aging. It wasn't seen as a disease, but more as just something that kind of happened to some people as they grew older.
The most common cause of dementia is Alzheimer's disease, which is a specific neurologic disease that slowly kills off brain cells and leaves you with deterioration of your thinking and your memory and your very identity.
My mother was diagnosed with probable Alzheimer's. She was diagnosed a little over 7 years ago when she was 65, and she actually recently just passed away earlier this month. My father called and told me that he had taken my mom to a neurologist, and she had actually been officially diagnosed with probable Alzheimer's. And at the time, the way that the distinction was made, they couldn't actually tell people that you definitely have Alzheimer's because that can't happen until you actually have an autopsy. But that you could either have probable Alzheimer's or possible Alzheimer's.
We're not 100% sure that it's Alzheimer's disease until the person dies and their brain is examined. There is no specific image or test or blood test that can specifically diagnose Alzheimer's disease, but we're actually very good at diagnosing it. You can diagnose Alzheimer's disease accurately about 95% of the time.
The first few years of her diagnosis, she lived with my father in Oklahoma, where he took care of her. And it was really quite a surprise because while my mother had been forgetful for a while, we didn't have any reason to think that it was a part of something systemic. We just figured she was in her mid-60s and was getting older, and you know, when she left her purse at the restaurant, it was forgetful because no one in our family has had anything like this before that we're aware of, no family history.
Is heartbreaking when the person you love looks at you like you're a total stranger. That's very hard. You know you're going to lose somebody, that they can be with you physically, but I knew that probably the time would come where, she wouldn't know me, and that was something that I was going to have to process and understand and grieve. And so when I first understood that was going to happen, it was of course very sad and hard. When I walk in to see her, pretty much at this point she knows me, but she doesn't know me every time. But she'll say, "Oh, there you are." But she does know me, and she doesn't know that I'm her daughter. She doesn't know my name. She really doesn't know my relationship to her. I could be a cousin or her mother or her sister, but she knows I'm her person. She may not know me, but I know her. And I thought that really sums up the love and the connection that people have with each other, whether there's a disease like dementia or Alzheimer's present or not. And so I think that's, it's hard, but it's love is hard.
My mother as a person was very outgoing. Like me, she loved to talk. She had a lot of friends. She was a very social person. And as my mother became less and less communicative and then lost all ability to communicate in a logical way, so toward the end of the 3 years, my father wasn't sleeping well, wasn't eating well, was very stressed, and was emotionally drained because he never knew if he was doing the right thing for my mother. It robs the person who has the disease of their personality. It drains the family. She started to wander, so he had to install locks on the doors above where she could reach. which felt very strange to him, to be locking his wife in the house. And then he had to be very, very patient because she followed him everywhere around the house. In the garage, in the backyard, in the living room, into the kitchen. And so it becomes very wearying on the caregiver and very tiring. And it was actually the neurologist who finally said to my father at one visit, "It's time for you to put Toni in a facility. You can't take care of her anymore." And he was relieved, but he was very, very sad because he felt like he had failed.
She was very angry with me that she had to be removed from her home, which was very, very difficult. So that was very painful and very difficult, but I had to do that for her well-being, and she lived in a multi-family. I mean, as somebody else could have been her. I can love her, I can care for her as a daughter, but I'm not a nurse, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a healthcare professional, I'm not a psychiatrist. There are a lot of things I'm not. And so I really felt I needed to bring in the right kind of human services and medical services that she needed. She's okay, she's happy, she's secure, she's safe, she's well cared for, and we love her, and she's ours. And this is just the way it is.
So the most important thing for people, family members or caregivers, is to understand that the only important thing is engagement. In other words, important is whether or not that person is engaged in a conversation with you, whether that person is engaged in life, engaged in a book, engaged in seeing things. So if the person with dementia is sitting around like not knowing what to do, they will be aggressive, they will be agitated, and they will be anxious. And everybody in the residence, all the staff members, all the caregivers, in addition to helping people if they need some help with getting up in the morning or getting dressed or going to the bathroom, also are engaged in these doing things.
I treat them as if they're part of my family. As if I would my grandmother or my father. You take care of them. I would take care of them the same way. When I can't turn around a bad situation, when a patient may have an anxiety attack or is like stuck in a mood and I can't seem to interest them or engage them in anything else, that's what is difficult. You don't want to tell them they can't do anything. So I've removed all negative words pretty much from my vocabulary. I don't say no, I don't say can't or don't. I try to reword things so it's positive. And don't touch upon those trigger situations.
The public narrative around dementia is one which says people, it's a tsunami, it's a storm, it's a downward slope, the sufferers suffer, the caregivers suffer, everybody suffers. That's a very negative way to see things.
It's something different every day, and that in itself is exhausting, not knowing what to expect.
The other public narrative is a public narrative of hope. If society and people, family members and people taking care of other people, believe they can make a difference, then they can make a difference.
We can share a joke or something we used to do, maybe a movie we used to watch, and she remembers. But it doesn't happen all the time. But it does feel good. It just makes you feel like you're doing something worthwhile.
Alzheimer's disease is not curable at this time, and in fact, there are no treatments that even have been proven to slow it down or to prevent it. So the Alzheimer's disease eventually does progress to the point where their body can't function anymore, and then they do die.
It's absolutely horrific. When she was diagnosed, everything stopped. our relationship changed. There was no way for it to get better, and it was a matter of trying to make her comfortable and trying to feel as good as you could about what was happening, because you knew inevitably she was going to die from this disease.
The consciousness of this person kind of just fades and fades, and then it rises up and then it fades, but they're still there. They're still there. That's an emotional roller coaster. Mom, can I help you do that? Yes. All right.
The families with Alzheimer's disease suffer enormously. The typical course of Alzheimer's disease goes on for a decade, or sometimes 2 decades. And so it's this prolonged course in which the person you love is becoming farther and farther away.
And sometimes it goes fast and sometimes it goes slow. She's not going to sequentially understand life any longer. But yet she still knows me somehow, most of the time. And when she recognizes me, it's just, there's that spark and her eyes light up and it's like, oh my gosh, you know, that's pretty amazing. She doesn't have to know me. You know, that's, you know, again, when you think about what real love is, like, it's not about me, you know, it's about honoring the relationship. And so I think that's the way that you go into it. And, you know, you have to prepare yourself and be ready for it because it is hurtful. It's not her fault, you know, but it does hurt.
Now, my mother only lived with the disease for 7 years, but some patients live for decades with this disease, and that seems so wrong and so unfair to me. I actually feel like it's a blessing that my mother only had the disease for diagnosed for 7 years. I don't think it was a very good quality of life, but to watch her doesn't seem like she was living the type of life that I would want to live, and I can't imagine that she would want to live.
Alzheimer's disease is actually a fatal disease. It starts off with this slowly progressive memory loss, and then it goes on for year after year after year after year, and you get worse and worse. And if you live long enough, you end up needing complete care. You need someone to bathe you and feed you, and you sort of become much more of a vegetative state. It's a very, very sad way to die.
When I looked at her, she was still my mother. She still looked like the same person that I knew for all those years, even though I knew she couldn't communicate. And I just had to hope that she was still really in there somewhere.
So thank goodness she hasn't passed away, but yet when I visit her, I still grieve because parts of her have already passed, even though she hasn't. But she's alive, you know, and she's not ready to go. Do you know your name? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Beauty.
Yeah. And do you know what year this is?